Is anyone not ready?
Wait, sorry, just saying.
Yeah, for sure. All right, for Charlotte Latin speaking first on the pro. Is anyone not ready? All right, with that, time will start now. The border is a ticking time bomb. That's because current border policy has handed criminals a golden opportunity. Troy Miller of Customs and Border Protection in 2023 reports that criminal organizations and terrorists are increasingly exploiting outdated technology and blind spots within the border surveillance to expand illicit activity and threaten national security. To protect the people on both sides of the border, we affirm resolve. The United States federal government should substantially increase surveillance infrastructure along its southern border. Our sole contention is securing the border. There are two key ways more surveillance aids citizens. The first is reducing trafficking. The absence of critical surveillance technology has made the border a hotspot for human trafficking. The Heritage Foundation reports in 2023 that because of a lack of U.S. border security, human trafficking has dramatically increased, seeing an 80% rise in the last year alone. Unless we get a handle on the border, human trafficking will only continue to soar. The consequences of inaction are devastating. The Heritage Foundation furthers that because of a lack of U.S. border surveillance, cartels are able to capture 60% of the 150,000 unaccompanied children left at our border every year, selling them into slavery. Updated and consistent surveillance infrastructure is the key to solving this humanitarian crisis. Dan Gore of the National Interest explained in 2021, although surveillance technology has already proven effective in saving tens of thousands of children from cartel capture and exploitation, increased capabilities are urgently needed to save the even more that are left behind. Moreover, surveillance prevents trafficking in and outside the U.S., as Franklin in 2003 explained that facial recognition technology paired with X-ray systems at the border is able to quickly scan cargo, identifying missing victims and trafficking suspects. More importantly, surveillance is able to track down and put an end to trafficking rings, saving thousands. As Professor of Engineering Andrew Trapp in 2017 writes, that increased data as a result of surveillance would allow law enforcement to combat trafficking by tracing the flow of trafficking networks, disrupting their infrastructure and eliminating them at their roots. Action is required. The National Library of Medicine in 2020 reports that human trafficking is akin to modern-day slavery and violates basic human rights. Tens of thousands of children and adult victims experience significant psychological and physical abuse. The second is fighting fentanyl. Fentanyl is pouring through the southern border. The National Immigration Forum in 2023 reports that illicit fentanyl smuggling has seen a 480% increase in the past year alone. More concerningly, Veronica Stralqueri in 2022 finds that Mexico is the dominant source of fentanyl. Although past efforts have seen limited success, Border Patrol is consistently overwhelmed. Nick Miroff of the Washington Post explains in 2023 that despite drug detection seeing a 6 times improvement thanks to previous implementation of surveillance technology, a majority of fentanyl still crosses the border undetected. Surveillance technology has the potential to quadruple the efficacy of detection, stopping the flow of drugs across the border and saving lives. As Miroff continues, that as of now, only 17% of cargo is scanned. But new surveillance infrastructure is able to increase the detection capacity to 70%, greatly decreasing the flow of illegal drugs across the border. The border is the main pathway for drugs into the country, as Senator Chris Coon reports in 2024 that 99% of fentanyl in the U.S. comes from the southern border. Refusing to safeguard the border while drugs ravage the nation is not an option. As Mark Warner in 2023 writes, that mainly driven by the fentanyl crossing our southern border undetected, more than 112,000 people die every year from overdoses. The efficacy of this technology is empirically proven. John Davis of CBP reports that in Arizona, the implementation of the latest surveillance system cut illegal crossings by 90%. Thus, to ensure that dangerous crimes don't spread beyond borders, we are so proud to affirm.
just for confirmation, this is BASIS Peoria speaking second on the negative. And my name is Rigo Guru, the first speaker for BASIS. Is everyone good to go? Perfect. As Albert Einstein once said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. For 30 years, Madden 24 explains that the U.S. has increased surveillance at the border to fix its problems. Yet after 3 decades, nothing has changed, and it is clear that surveillance is not the answer. We negate. Contention 1 is deadlier routes. Increased surveillance won't stop illegal immigration. It will only influence migrants to pursue more dangerous paths into the U.S. Harper 24 explains, surveillance shifts people's routes towards more dangerous terrain in the desert, increasing their vulnerability to injury, dehydration, and exhaustion. Moreover, as a part of a growing arsenal of surveillance, people will be pursued by high-speed, military-grade technology designed to kill. We've seen it in the past. Voice 19 writes that from 2006 to 2011, the U.S. invested $3.7 billion into ground sensors and motion-detecting radar, and as a result, surveillance technologies tripled the death rate at the border. Altogether, Dell 24 concludes that more surveillance won't reduce migration, but instead more people will end up dying on deadlier routes, with Molnar 24 quantifying that growing surveillance at the border has already claimed thousands of lives, and more surveillance will worsen the issue. Contention 2 is the surveillance state. Affirming will put power into the wrong hands. Hellerstein 21 explains that increasing surveillance at the border will allow the federal government to deploy technology in whatever ways that they see fit. As a result, immigrants will be under constant, real-time surveillance through advanced technologies such as unmanned drones and AI watchtowers. The technology will be used in a dehumanizing manner for racial profiling, unjust killings, and more. Ultimately, affirming gives more power to a border patrol organization that historically oppresses migrants and border communities. Even worse, this surveillance won't just apply to migrants. Millions of people living in border zones will experience the effects. As BASIS 19 writes that these strategies turn border zones into militarized areas where you can't go to the doctor, grocery store, or your own middle school without going through Homeland Security checkpoints. Indeed, Greer 19 confirms that surveillance technologies lack meaningful oversight, which is why there is no limit to the way that government agencies can abuse them. For example, aerial vehicles will scan the faces of people who live near the U.S. border and collect that data. Overall, Hellerstein terminalizes that this type of surveillance will result in a loss of civil liberties for millions of migrants and citizens alike. Contention 3 is politics. Harris is set to win the presidency, but it's close. Lazar 24 finds Harris leads Trump in a slim margin of 50% to 45% among likely voters. The race remains tight. Hispanic voters will decide the election. Rodriguez 24 confirms Hispanic voters play a pivotal role in several swing states. Latinos are part of the coalition that helped elect Biden in 2020. Any erosion of support for Harris among Latinos could make a difference in a close race against Trump. While Hispanic voters do broadly support border security, that is only when treatment is humane. Oppressive policy will alienate voters. Cespedes 24 explains, border policy will impact voting decisions. Latino voters want the country to embrace a free or cruelty approach to this issue and reject subjugating individuals to inhumane treatment. Surveillance on the border is abusive and dehumanizing. Harris would lose the Hispanic vote. Hellerstein 21 finds, by expanding the power of tech-based surveillance, a more authoritarian administration will be able to deploy that mass surveillance for their purposes. It's a sensation of feeling pinned down and watched, dehumanizing an entire category of people and creating a world in which people are criminalized and their deaths are normalized. And, in the event of a Trump win, climate policy is doomed. Spec 20 confirms, a second Trump term would lead to irreversible climate damage, thrusting our planet above the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold, and thwart global efforts to combat the crisis. Even if some warming is inevitable, every little bit matters. Pierce 23 writes, climate change causes crop failures, droughts, flooding, and drives hunger and disease. Every 0.1 degree Celsius of warming can cause 100 million deaths. Thus, we are so proud to negate.
You have the drops?
Yeah, maybe just one laptop for me.
Can I get the first question since you spoke first?
For sure.
Okay, cool. The time will start now. Let's talk about your argument about deadlier routes.
Yeah.
How many more people take these deadlier routes than you affirm?
Obviously, I can't give you a very specific number, but our voice evidence indicates that empirically, when you implement surveillance, a significant portion of people choose to take the deadlier route.
What is a significant portion?
Thousands. The Molnar evidence quantifies it that when we implement surveillance, already thousands and thousands upon
Okay,
people
so
have
at the
died.
point where already thousands of people are doing this, how much worse does it get?
More thousands, right? Obviously, I
Why
can get,
more thousands? Like,
because-
what's the incentive? So, like right now, I see two paths. Either you go through legal ports of entry, or you take these riskier routes. There's no reason why, when you affirm, they can no longer go through these legal ports of entry.
No, there's a couple of issues with that. First, there's significant backlogs in the area of legal entry ports, which is why people choose to come through these illegal entry ports.
This sounds like a
but
problem that already exists.
Secondly, let me.
I would argue that the affirmative actually solves a lot better for this because we're able to implement more technology that solves these backlogs. But you can take a question.
I'll explain why that isn't true in rebuttal, but
Okay.
let me take a question. So let's talk about your argument about fentanyl smuggling. What specific improved technologies are going to be implemented to
Facial
ensure?
recognition and X-ray scanners. That's what the Davis and the Miroc evidence talk about when they tell you that in specific test cases in Arizona, when these new X-ray scanners were implemented, we saw a 90% decrease in the smuggling of drugs.
But
let's go
wait,
back
wait,
to
can I take a quick follow-up?
I think I answered your
Well,
argument.
you just asked me 3 follow-up questions. I would like to
Sure.
take one. So what's new about these X-rays? Because we've had X-rays on the border since 2019. We'd have FRT since 2019 as well. What is the difference between these new X-rays that is going to solve all the problems? Like our evidence discussed, we've had these technologies and they haven't done anything.
Yeah, number one, these technologies have been located in very specific test sites. The problem is it's not expansive across the entire border. But moreover, we would tell you that they're being updated with new ways to filter through the data, like AI, which is specifically beneficial.
So
but
AI.
now we're going to go, like, that's one of, like, the five things I just listed.
Could I get a couple more then?
I just listed, like, 5. Let's go to your argument about the surveillance state. At the point where after 9/11, the NSA surveilled practically everyone, and we've seen things like the Patriot Act surveilling countless people across the entire globe. Why does a small increase in personal data collection trigger your huge global impact?
Okay, a couple of issues with that. First, the resolution mandates a substantial increase in surveillance,
Yeah.
which is not a little increase. Secondly, there's a fundamental difference between technology in the US and technology on the border. And thirdly, and most important,
Why?
because specifically technology on the border is much more invasive because of the Greer evidence, which indicates that these surveillance technologies lack meaningful oversight, which is not the same in the US.
I would argue that that's the
Okay.
same, and we've seen this with the NSA. The NSA surveils practically every citizen in the U.S., the U.S. borders, and citizens abroad. You probably have to prove to me why specifically, what the bright line is to see your huge impacts trigger. Because I would argue that, scanning a person's face when they try to go to the grocery store will not result in, authoritarianism across the globe.
There is a significant difference between technologies at the border and in the US, but the
What's
third
the significant difference? You still haven't told me what that
I
is.
told you the technologies on the border lack much more oversight,
Why?
and they're more invasive.
They're run by the same, DHS
Because
company.
empirically, the border is used to
organization.
test new technologies. Therefore, there can't be much oversight on them if they're very innovative and new.
Okay, that's
And
cross.
okay, we'll get to it about it.
Yes, you can back.
Can I see all the evidence on politics?
Yeah.
Sent.
Get it while we're on prep. We just got that. Alright, we'll take running prep starting now.
Yeah, that's 30 seconds. Okay. So we're just gonna be responding to their arguments. Is everybody ready? Hi. one simple fact that should frame your ballot, and that it is that in the status quo, there's a cartel crisis raging and a fentanyl crisis exploding throughout America. The more that we sit on our hands and do nothing, the more and more that hundreds of thousands of people will die by the year. Voting affirmative is imperative. But let's specifically address the first argument about more dangerous migration. Realize that it's non-unique, because what Massey of Princeton finds is that the militarization of the border has already had powerful consequences, pushing migrants away from the traditional crossing points, which means that their argument has already happened. But the only way to actually save these migrants and lead to safe migration is through more surveillance. In fact, what Lee finds in 2022 is that empirically, deaths on the border overall decrease when we implement more surveillance in both legal ports of entry and these routes that they talk about. That's really simple. It's because Border Patrol is able to do search and rescue operations to actually save these migrants who are on these dangerous routes. You should prefer our empirical evidence, because our evidence is from 2022 and analyzes the new technology that Border Patrol is using, like drones, whereas their only empirical example is from 2006 to 2011. Also, what Hall finds is that specifically in Texas, when this technology was implemented, because of search and rescue operations as a result of surveillance, you saved 22,000 migrants in less than a year. We need to replicate that success across the entirety of the border and save a lot more people on scope. Lastly, we should not remain blind on the border as more migrants die. Realize the reason why these migrants are migrating in the first place is because of cartels and the violence that they export. If we're able to solve for that, these people have no reason to migrate in the first place. Let's address their second argument about the surveillance state. Realize that, first of all, the United States model of surveillance is on net better than China's. We should model to the world how to appropriately and democratically conduct surveillance. As Campbell finds in 2019, China is already exporting authoritarian surveillance around the world. Thankfully, the United States has the ability to combat this, not by ceding the market in the global stage to China, but by showing the world how to protect privacy and security at the same time. Secondly, surveillance and automated cameras is on net better than the alternative of human patrol officers who are more likely to abuse migrants. If I'm a migrant, I would rather go through an automated security checkpoint than have Border Patrol officers driving around border times in truck trying to find illegal migrants. Thirdly, their argument is non-unique. The link about mass surveillance is already happening across the United States, as the ACLU finds in 2017 that Section 702 of the NSA allows the warrantless surveillance of people inside and outside of the United States. The AF is simply a drop in the bucket relative to the mass surveillance programs that we're seeing in the status quo. Again, voting nay and doing nothing will not solve these problems. But let's address their third argument about politics. Realize that first, overall, in a holistic analysis, Trump is leading the Electoral College overall, which addresses more specific swing states rather than my opponent's argument about the general popular vote. As McCarty finds in 2024, Harris's lead in the polls is being steadily cut. Harris leads Trump by 1.6 points within the polls margin of error. But Silver's forecast model shows that Trump is leading Harris in the Electoral College by 5 points, which means that our polling is a lot more specific to the actual election. Secondly, the affirmative would be passed through Congress, and the GOP would just take credit for the border surveillance, which means even if the policy is good, the Republicans would just take credit for it. Thirdly, what Contreras finds is that in the status quo, Latinx voters are not supporting Kamala, but stronger border policy would shift the tide, as Contreras finds that Harris does not appear to have won over enough Latinos to win these states. Latinos are a key voting bloc that has slowly been drifting to Republicans. A review of exit polls from 50 years found that Harris has yet to reach the level of new support among Latino voters needed to win. You should prefer this, because our argument is about the perception of voters. Again, the consequences of the resolution will happen too late to actually affect the resolution. Please vote for the affirmative.
Can I get all the evidence on politics?
It was 2 cards, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll send it. Are you doing it?
Yeah.
We'll take a little bit of prep, starting.
Okay.
You got that last response on happening too late, right? What happened to us? The attacks happened too late for it to actually affect the election of the surveillance. Attacks happened too late. Just let me know what happens. Alright, that's 10 seconds.
We're going to keep running prep starting now. All right, it was 7 more seconds.
17 total used.
All right, starting time now. All right, that was 11. So 17 plus 11, 28.
Can you take prep for 10? Can you take prep for?
No, they're right.
Okay.
It was 10, 7, 11.
Oh, okay.
Just for clarification, this is Sudeep Vedakudi speaking second for the con, for BASIS. It's going to start on our case and then go to theirs. Is everybody good to go? Okay. This debate is not about whether the world is good or bad. It's about whether this policy is something we should pass. And if we prove that surveillance has been failing and will continue to fail, then you should vote negative. With that being said, on our first argument about deadlier routes, they say it's non-unique because of militarization, but the Harper 24 evidence says that it's going to get a lot worse when these migrants go to more deadly routes when you increase surveillance. Secondly, they say deaths decreased empirically, but their evidence is only looking at 2022. Mueller does a 20-year analysis and identifies long-term trends and finds the deaths on net increase. Even if they save some lives through surveillance, more people die. Moreover, it's not about whether there's new technology right now. It's about the psyche of migrants. What do they think? If they see surveillance, they go to more dangerous routes and they die more. Moreover, think about it logically. If you're a migrant being chased by surveillance, you're going to run away. You're not going to be accepted and saved. Then they say that cartels migrate, or people migrate away from cartels. No, a lot of reasons that when people migrate to the United States is because they want economic opportunity. There are no cartels in India and Africa, but they still come here. On our second point about the surveillance state, first they say that it's democracy and modeling. They talk about China. One, our argument is not about modeling at all. So they have no impact on whatever this is. Secondly, our model of authoritarianism, our model of surveillance would still be bad because we're using it in dehumanizing ways. Secondly, they talk about automation, but it's not just automation on the border. It's these people who use the automation in bad ways to over-police communities, leading to more surveillance and more deaths. Third, they say it's happening across the United States. It's not about what happens in the United States. It's about you making a decision to do good or do bad. You're making it worse on the border, and you're over-policing marginalized communities. That is bad. On our contention about politics, first they say Trump is leading electoral college. That evidence is from September 3rd, before the debate happened. The debate shifted what voters think, which is why our more recent evidence from 2 days ago finds that Kamala Harris is winning now, so you prefer it. Secondly, our Irish evidence from 2 days ago finds that Silver predicts Harris is going to win now, so clearly their polls are on our side as well. Secondly, they say Republicans are going to take credit. It doesn't matter if they try to take credit or not. People see that Kamala Harris is the vice president and is in office now. She's the one who's going to be blamed for bad policy, which is why voters are going to shift. Third, they say that it's drifting to Republicans now, but their poll is not as recent as ours, and our evidence from September 18th, which is 5 days more recent, finds that Kamala is winning among these voter groups, so clearly she's doing good. Four, they say that it's going to happen too late. The impacts, no, it's going to happen pretty soon if we deploy surveillance. The impacts going to be seen. At the very least, they think the technology will do something bad, so you see Kamala losing the election. Let's go to their case. On their first point about the border, understand that most of their issues are related to cartels and drug trafficking and human trafficking. If cartels can still do the illicit activity that they do anyway, then all of their issues are still going to happen. The reason why cartels are always going to be able to do this bad stuff is because our Taj Mob 21 evidence finds that corruption is rampant across the border. They bribe officials, aren't able to smuggle drugs and people through, which is why our Martin 20 evidence, doing analysis from 2006 to 2019, concludes that even if we increase surveillance, corruption meant that cartels could still traffic people and traffic drugs, so all of their impacts will still happen because you don't change the fundamental structure of the organization. But secondly, our Francis 24 evidence, which is more recent than their evidence, finds that Mexico's new president, Sheinbaum, has been elected and is doing things like high-profile drug busts to address their issues, which is why we don't need to affirm and risk the liberties of millions of people. Go to their argument of fentanyl trafficking more specifically. One, our Sadler 23 evidence finds that a lot of these cartels use things like sea routes for 90% of drug movement. Even if you solve for it on the border, you don't solve for the majority of the drugs that are going through the sea routes. That also makes sense because it's cheaper to move drugs through routes because you have massive cargo tankers that can carry more. Secondly, our T24 evidence finds that when you implement unilateral policy, the United States making this big decision on its own to implement a bunch of surveillance on the border, it alienates Mexico and decreases cooperation because Mexico doesn't get a say. And when cooperation goes down between between the two, they can't work together to solve shared issues like drug trafficking and cartel trafficking. Third, our FIPIN 21 evidence finds that when we have surveillance, 9 of 10 times it results in false positives that do not work. Don't let them say that it's new technology solving. We've had X-ray since 2008. We've had AI since 2019. On this argument about Davis, and says decreasing 90% of legal entry crossings, that evidence is from the CBP. It is not a reliable source. You prefer our evidence from Molnar that says when surveillance has been used in the past 20 years, it has not solved any of their issues, and it will not now. Vote nay.
I think that 90% of drugs are over zero to and Shine Bomb's doing drug bust.
Can you say it one more time?
Shine Bomb, corruption, zero.
Okay.
I got Shine Bomb.
I can say that I got it already.
Already got Shine Bomb?
Yeah. All the evidence is sent.
What's your first response to this? That's winning. The evidence were to do. Yeah, their evidence from before the debate. All right.
Sir. Let's talk about the C-Roots argument. I just read your Sadler evidence, and it says that essentially what happens is that cartels get 90% of their drugs from sea routes from Asia. So they're essentially moving along sea routes drugs from China to Mexico.
That is not what the evidence says.
What then happens to those drugs?
The context is pretty clear if you look at the evidence that they sell to other markets, and it specifically talks about Europe where they sell to, where it's a lot easier to get drugs into.
That simply isn't true. I just read your Sadler evidence. It says that cartels get their
That
drugs
is not true.
from China.
I think
It's
this
the
is
other way
semantics.
around.
The judges can
and
read the
then
evidence.
they export their drugs across
That
the
is
border.
not what the evidence says. If you read the context, it is talking about them selling to other markets, and it name drops Europe as another one that is selling to. Moreover, we give a warrant that even if they, for example, they don't sell to sea routes now, if it is cheaper to move drugs on massive cargo containers, they will still do that even if they can't access the border through
says that
surveillance.
they're getting chemicals and lab materials
That is
from
part
China.
of the evidence, but if you read the full card, you read the full context, it is in the context of them selling those places and selling
That
it
simply is
overseas.
not true,
Okay,
but
the judges can
it's
take a
not a
look.
question.
That's just semantics. All right, so on this argument, I guess about your Davis evidence. So if illegal crossings decrease 90%, how do they know how many illegal crossings happened?
What do you mean?
So they say illegal crossings decrease 90%. Are there illegal crossings that they didn't see?
Yeah, obviously there's a margin of error, and in the studies that they do, they correct for that, but they generally see the amount of migrants that they're encountering, and they factor that into the calculus of these studies.
That's not what the study does. The study actually doesn't have any methodology, and if you look at the study, it's from the CBP, the Border Patrol Agency. It's literally in the website, in the URL.
That's simply, we agree that it's from Border Patrol Agency, because that information is very pertinent
Right, so do you
to
think-
Border Patrol, and they're the ones that are collecting the data, but they're also using studies to also find...
Sure, but do you think that's a reliable piece of evidence when
I
there's
do think
other
that is
evidence?
reliable. I think it's the most
All right.
reliable piece of the evidence because they're the one doing the surveillance in the first place.
Okay.
I'm going to grab a question. Let's talk about your surveillance state arguments. So, how are migrants being surveilled right now?
Yeah, for example, their privacy is going away. There's checkpoints at places like grocery stores
Okay.
and hospitals because they want to track migrants. Our argument is yes, it is bad right now. But when you substantially expand surveillance like the Affirmative says you would, it's going to worsen it for millions of people living in border communities and also increase the agency for the
So,
Border Patrol
how?
to act. Yeah.
So what is a Border Patrol agent doing now, what you think, and what would they do when you affirm?
So an example is right now they're using cameras to track people and see where they're going or to hide their activity.
Okay.
But if you give them biometric technology, if you give them facial recognition technology, they can track migrant populations better, over-police these populations, and leads to more assault and more abuse by an organization
But
that's
that's not what's
historically
actually
oppressive.
happening on the border. In the status quo, Border Patrol agents are essentially in trucks and go around throughout border communities trying to find
That is not true.
these illegal migrants and then capture them.
That is
But
not true.
When they're
And
automated and legal points of entry, migrants are able to go through, automatically scan, be immediately identified.
People still have to monitor the technology that's automating this. And to clarify, the only evidence read on the question about what Border Patrol is doing right now comes from our case. It's from Beatty, it's from Greer, etc. In rebuttal, you do not read any evidence about what these Border Patrol is doing right now, so it should not be brought up in the debate.
Okay, we've taken a total of 40 seconds of prep. We're on your turn now.
Just go for politics that way.
So wait, can we pause for
Yeah.
You said false positives.
Yes. Sent.
Do you want to go for surveillance? Yes or no? No. Only politics. Yes.
Okay, you start.
Well, we're doing prep now.
What's this? 2 minute front line in. 2 minute front line. It depends on what they say. We'll see. Probably not. I think we can just cover politics. I think that is fine. Just spend a lot of slow it down. Make the extension very clear. And C, explain that in the context of the debate, they have not done enough work to address the politics argument. Regardless of what you think, they have not done enough work on the debate level to address. On the way. You can write that down if you want. But what's this last thing? Just in case ACLU section 72 warrants like just gets worse. Yeah. No methodology. By the way, I don't know about the no methodology thing. Just say it's from the CPP, it's unreliable, that our evidence isn't, and since surveillance doesn't work. What's the implication of the Fifth evidence? What's the implication of the Fifth evidence? Talking about post surveillance doesn't work. I'm making blood up later, but we're not going to go for it. Physical option is what we're going to go for. Did you have the T24 reliable policies? Maybe we can go for one. Okay, those two things, and maybe if I think I'm going to dodgeball. I think I can do dodgeball Francis. Sadler. No, don't do Sadler. It's weird. It's weird. Just those three, and then address that maybe. So you can that those three should be two. Spend a lot of time with the Lang Trump versus cooperation, and it affects more people. Trump versus cooperation, and it affects more people. Versus cooperation makes you.
Is anyone not ready?
Is that all your prep?
Sorry?
Is that
10 or 15 minutes.
I think we have 10 left.
okay?
Okay, it's gonna go the Ask the Wang neg. Is anyone not ready? Alright, perfect. The best place for you to vote in today's round is on our argument about trafficking. Extend the argument. In this last year alone, we have seen an 80% increase in the amount of trafficking. That's because cartels capture 60% of the 150,000 children left on our border. Thankfully, X-ray technology is able to find these children, save them, and trace the trafficking rate to their root, eliminating them, saving them from modern-day slavery. They give you 4 responses, but none of them hit the mark. The first response is about corruption, but however, corruption makes up 0.025% of agents. You would have to believe that the dozens of agents at every single checkpoint are corrupt enough to get away with just turning off x-ray scanners. This argument is completely illogical. The second response is about Scheinbaum doing drug busts. But first, at the point where Scheinbaum has not been inaugurated, this clearly isn't happening. But then second, Scheinbaum has adopted hugs and not bullets response to cartels, and is simply a continuation of the previous president's failure to address cartels. The third response is about us doing a unilateral policy and decreasing cooperation. However, what the Department of State finds in 2024 is that in every instance where we do an increase in surveillance, this happens bilaterally with Mexico. There is no reason why this one would be any different. The fourth response is about false positives. Read their evidence, it's horrible. It's not specific to x-rays or trafficking at all. It's about a smart wall. They concede the trap evidence in 2017 that tells you that we are able to use x-ray and facial recognition to trace trafficking rings to their roots. The fifth and final response is that the Davis evidence is from the CBP and is bad. However, I would argue that it is the best evidence in today's round because it is the only evidence that analyzes the new technology in specific test sites like Arizona and is 90% effective. Go to the weighing. We would argue that alternative actors will always solve for their arguments. However, the 90,000 children that are being exploited on the border are invisible to policymakers, and you need to prioritize them in today's round because they are continually structurally oppressed. Go to their first argument about deadlier routes. They're not winning here. What they have conceded is the Hall empiric, which is the only evidence analyzing new technology that tells you that we are able to save 22,000 immigrants from deadlier route. We are the only one that quantifies this. They give you no numbers in the entire round. Then go to their second argument about surveillance state. What they failed to respond is our third argument about it being terminally non-unique. At the point where the NSA surveils everywhere across the entire world, they have proven you no specific unique reason as to why this specific increase is key. Then, go to their third and final argument. What they have cold conceded is our third response that Latinos like border surveillance. What Contreras in 2024 finds is that the actual Latino voters want an increase in surveillance on the border. What that means is because what they were made untouched was that our poll is better because it is a holistic analysis of the Electoral College. Polls change by the day. Don't vote on a post date. Vote on the evidence analyzing the Electoral College. For all of these reasons, it is a very clear app ballot.
We have 2:33 left. We're going to take that starting now.
Let's listen. What's the evidence? Is that Latinos don't want Indian treatment. That's the I'll just ask for evidence. Just ask for evidence.
Okay. Can I?
Actually,
I think we're okay.
Oh, you don't want to?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Okay, start resuming prep. We had 128, so 2:33 with 105 left. Starting now.
Remember, there was like evidence that says like a few bad apples for this. One person did $280 million. One person $280 million. They did not respond to Martin. That is an analysis from 2006 to 2019. Corruption meant the drug cartels could do anything, and then say does not new technology does not matter. It's the people on board that operate the technology that allow them to do whatever they want. The technology that we have is a fundamental. We have like 20, 30, 33, 38 seconds left.
You want me to extend some on? Can you extend some on?
Yeah, that's fine. Go for that. That's a second. I think that's a second. That's all I think. Okay. It's all we can. It's all we need.
Davis on here?
No, I think you're fine.
No, Davis.
Oh, no, for Davis, say that. That's
I have 5 seconds left. Could we take that? Okay, starting, resuming now. It's more reliable, it's not from CBP. Yeah, okay, that's all our prep.
Oh. Can you give me my flip? In the water. I'm gonna put that to the left. Okay. So the order of the speech is going to be starting on our arguments, going to a comparison between the arguments, and then finishing with their arguments. Is everyone good to go? All right, perfect. Then time will start on my first word. Let's start with our first argument about deadly routes. They have this term from the Hall empiric, but remember, our Molnar evidence is a much longer analysis, which is why you should prefer it, and it says thousands of people have died from surveillance, meaning it is very clear with the number. The second argument we will explain is the surveillance state argument. The one response they put on this contention is that it's non-unique because the NSA already does it, but we've already explained for the Greer evidence that there's less oversight on the border, which allows the technology to be more abused and overall worsens the conditions. But then, let's go for the most important argument in this round, politics. Remember, right now, Kamala is winning for the most recent evidence in this round. However, when you implement surveillance technologies, they are historically dehumanizing and oppressive per the Hellestein evidence, which goes conceded. When you implement this erodes support from Latino voters, which are uniquely key for Kamala winning. They make the argument that, Latino voters actually want border security, but they have missed the nuance from our Cespedes evidence, which indicates, yes, Latinos do want border security, but they don't want border security that is inhumane and oppressive, which is very specific in the evidence. We have isolated that per Hellerstein that the implementation of this tech will be abusive and will be oppressive for things like invasive AI, meaning it will push away Latino voters, and you will see Trump locked into office. That's really bad because per the SPECT evidence, when Trump gets locked in, he passes terrible climate policy, which worsens the climate, and per the Pierce evidence, every 0.1 degree Celsius of warming causes 100 million deaths. The other response they have is that their evidence is much better because it analyzes the Electoral College. Our evidence is 2 days ago, which counts the debate, which is why it's better, but more importantly, their own evidence is from Silver, and he looked into the Electoral College, and more recently he said that Kamala is going to win. So you should prefer on that. Then, let's go to this argument about weighing. So 3 reasons why our arguments are more important than theirs. Firstly, they have conceded that Trump decreases cooperation with Mexico, and we can never solve any of the cartel problems if we don't have cooperation with Mexico. Secondly, climate change is a very large issue. It impacts all over the globe and impacts hundreds of millions of people, which is why you should prefer it. And thirdly, remember, climate change creates instability all over the globe, and these are the exact conditions that cause trafficking to appear. That's warming that causes vulnerability. Meaning, if you want to vote for trafficking, you vote for the climate argument. Then, let's go to their weighing. They make one piece of weighing so that all actors can solve our arguments. There's no explanation of what actors are solving our arguments, and historically, the people on the border have been marginalized, which is why you should prefer them. Let's go to their arguments. At the top, the corruption argument was completely mishandled. The total of evidence indicates that corruption is rampant on the border, which is why cartels will always get their way. They say corruption makes up 0.02%. That's fine. That's still quite a few employees. And moreover, our OCCRIP evidence indicates that it's just a couple of bad apples, that it's all it takes to ensure that cartels can get their way, which is why the Martin evidence, which has been conceded, is an analysis from 2006 to 2019 indicates that despite increases in surveillance and this new tech they discussed, we still saw cartels improve in strength and increase violence. Now we'll go to the Francis evidence, which indicates that Sheinbaum is improving. Even if she isn't right now inaugurated, she still has good intentions and is doing high-profile drug busts, which is why cartels will already be solved. And finally, on this Davis evidence, it's from the CBP. Of course they're going to say that, our surveillance is working, but empirically it's not for our evidence, which is more reliable because it's not directly from the border organization. Thus, it's a clear neg ballot.
Clifford Grant.
Yeah, y'all can take the first question.
All right.
Okay. Where does your Martin evidence say the words Warner or surveillance once?
I can look at it.
We got it.
I'll pull it up.
Your Martin evidence is talking about U.S. security assistance in Mexico and police officers.
Yeah, it's talking about law enforcement entities and security assistance.
Does that have anything to do with U.S.
Security assistance in cartels. It does not mention surveillance or
It is talking about security assistance and bribe taking amongst law enforcement personnel. CBP is law enforcement, and more, not just Mexican.
American law enforcement.
It is talking about cartels infiltrating the Mexican police system and bribing and making dirty cops. It is not talking about border patrol, where a very, very small amount of the
It's not. It says U.S. security assistance.
Make a substantial difference in the amount
It
of
does.
people trafficked.
It says U.S. security
It very
assistance in the
specifically says
evidence,
US
and
security
moreover, the Taj Mob evidence wasn't addressed. That does talk about corruption in the United States and says that on the border corruption is rampant and corruption is happening, which allows cartels to move things
Where
through.
is that? Because
The
I
warrant
asked
wasn't.
for the corruption evidence, and the only thing that you sent me was this Martin evidence.
Taj
didn't
Mob
ask-
is there as well.
Wait, you didn't ask for the corruption evidence. You specifically says Martin. This is what we sent.
No, we said
No, we said
corruption.
I don't like that like Cortez.
Okay. We can send it to you after cross, but the evidence is specific in saying that it is U.S.
That also
officials.
feels kind of unfair, though.
I mean,
I'm making my,
This was the first time this evidence argument was brought up. So to clarify, like this wasn't brought up in the debate. We'll win the analysis regardless of the evidence in final focus because analysis should take place as well. But I'll take a question. So let's talk about. Actually, I don't really have a question.
I got a
Okay,
question.
sure, I'll put
Wait.
it
Oh, you want?
okay, sorry,
No, if you need.
Okay.
You can get a question.
Yeah.
So when you extend your politics argument, you extend the fact that this or like all of this technology is abusive. So to win your politics argument, you have to win your surveillance state argument.
Not necessarily.
We just have to win that surveillance is used.
Sounds like you did when you extended it.
We just have to win that surveillance is used in inhumane ways. We do not need to win that NSA is not surveilling everywhere. That was their only response to the surveillance state. You conceded the Hellerstein evidence and the Beatty evidence that surveillance is used in oppressive and inhumane ways. And when you look at how it's been used,
The Contreras 24 evidence that tells you that Latinos want border surveillance. No matter what
yes,
kind of border
and our
surveillance
Rodriguez
they
evidence talks about that. We agree. Overall and broadly, they do want border security as long as it is done in humane ways to the communities that they are from. They do not want border security that dehumanizes their communities, leads to unjust killings and unjust assaults, which is what surveillance does. So that policy is bad.
Actual
But-
evidence that says that the perception of this technology will be dehumanizing. Our Contreras evidence, which is the most recent evidence on this
It's
fact,
not.
tells you that if Kamala took action, it would be considered very well among Latino voters.
It's not true.
What it also says is that she's releasing the Latino
Your evidence is about border security.
right now.
In case we said, we agree, border security does matter to voters, but how it is done also matters, and that's why surveillance is not a good thing. But we'll take your question.
Can I ask a question?
Okay.
Okay.
We have like 10 seconds. Let's take that.
the order is going to be talking about our arguments and then talking about their arguments. We saw an 80% increase in trafficking last year. That number is simply not sustainable. We cannot see that again year after year. That's why we need to implement surveillance technology on the border to A, what has been completely conceded throughout the round, to trace cartels and their trafficking rings back to their root by tracing the pattern of their data and stopping cartels and trafficking altogether. But B, saving the 60% of the 150,000 children who are captured at the border every single year. Voting affirmative will save tens of thousands of lives and even more from being trafficked. They ultimately have three responses to this argument, but they all miss the mark. They first tell you that there's corruption at the border, but again, their evidence is really bad. It is talking about the Mexican police. But secondly, and more importantly, what they've conceded from Natalie is that Border Patrol agents are 0.0025% corrupt, which means that they do not represent a substantial amount to actually impact the amount of trafficking that happens at the border. Their second response is that Scheinbaum is doing drug busts. This does not relate to the trafficking argument at all, and is just predictive at best. Do they just say that she has good intentions? I don't really know what that means. Then, the weighing is very clear and comparative. What they have missed is that other actors will always solve for climate change and issues like that because everybody has a vested interest in stopping climate change. All other countries and all other international organizations will solve for that, but nobody has a vested interest in the children being left at the border, so that's what you should prioritize. On their weighing, they say that Trump will mean that we can't solve for cartels, but they have no evidence and no warrant for this. Then they say that climate change will make trafficking worse. But again, as explained, the other actors' argument functions as defense, meaning that we will solve for climate change anyway, and none of their prereqs will flow through. But they are way behind on this politics argument. What they have conceded is that Latino voters perceive border security as a good thing. That means when Kamala will do it, they will vote for her more. They go on this argument about the implementation is bad and the result of it. But what they have conceded is that the implementation will take too long to affect the election, which means that the most important thing that our contrarious evidence finds is that the perception of Latino voters that instantly happens is when Kamala implements border security, more people vote for her, which turns this argument to our side. It is a very clear ballot for the affirmative.
Oh yeah, I got you.
It's going to start on our arguments, go to some weighing, and then go to their arguments. Everybody good to go? The easiest place for you to vote is on our argument about politics. Let's extend it really quickly. What we say is that Kamala is winning now. They have conceded that. However, when you affirm and pass a policy that is inhumane surveillance and targets the communities in a bad way that oppresses them, Hispanic voters who are key to the election per our evidence are no longer willing to give her support, which means swing states fall through and Kamala does not win. In the event of a Trump election, they have conceded that climate policy gets a lot worse. He pulls out of agreements and people die. For every 0.1 degrees Celsius in warming, 150 million people die. That being said, so just their responses. One, they say that people want border security. We've agreed throughout the debate that Latinos do want border security, but they care about the way in which it is implemented. It is done inhumanely through surveillance, which is why they do not like it per our evidence, which is more recent. Secondly, they say it will take too long, but I responded to this earlier in the debate, and I said it's going to happen quickly because surveillance gets implemented right away, and you see the effects. With that being said, you know that in the context of the debate round, we are winning our politics argument. If we win the weighing on it, you should be voting neg. Here's why we win the weighing. A, they have conceded we affected more people on magnitude, 150 million people per each 0.1 degrees Celsius. Secondly, this alternative actors analysis makes no sense. Even if alternative actors are trying to solve for the issue, every 0.1 degrees Celsius matters. Trump worsening the issue is still a reason to vote for us. Moreover, what alternative actor is going to do it? How are they going to do it? This isn't weighing, and it shouldn't function as it. We are winning that we impact more people, so you should negate. With that being said, let's also stress their weighing. They say no one solves for trafficking. That is not true. There are organizations that are solving for it right now. They definitely aren't winning that. At that point, our argument is won. We are winning the weighing. We should win the round. Let's address their case anyway. On their arguments, they have conceded the OCPR evidence that a couple bad apples can still ruin corruption, still allow drug cartels to get through. The reason why is one person literally smuggled $288 million worth of drugs through corruption. Even if corruption is small, it still enables drugs to happen and trafficking to happen, which means their issues are always going to occur. They say it's just by the March of 20 evidence. If you look at rebuttal, I read the Taj Mob 21 evidence as well, which says that corruption is happening across the border and bribe taking does occur. Moreover, look at the warrant level of it. We have had surveillance for 30 years. It has not worked. It's not about new technologies, but a fundamental issue with the organization, because the organization is corrupt, abuses its people, and you vote neg on Trump.
Good on, guys.
Yeah.
Good on, guys.
Yeah.
So for the water. Yeah, I know. I think it was Celsius.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah, I think